This is me, guys. I'm Bob Hoban. I'm a lawyer. I had founded the Hoban Law Group 14 years ago. Hoban Law Group became the largest cannabis-only law firm in the world. I had 72 lawyers for 14 years. I sold that law firm in July of 2021. One of the reasons I sold the firm, just out of curiosity, is because COVID happened. And COVID caused all of my employees to say, I don't know if I want to work anymore. Life really changed, and I didn't dismiss that. It happened to all of us in a certain way. But when you're a business owner and people say, I'm stopping working, and there's work to be done, it really changed things up, and it really made me realize that I had good people. They were friends, they were colleagues, they were partners. But at the end of the day, it was my business and my family. So I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't rely on other people like this. I'm going to go take this and put it onto a bigger firm so that maybe I can be the guy someday that says, I don't want to work anymore. And then it becomes somebody else's problem. So anyway, I built the Hoban Law Group up for 14 years. We've only worked in cannabis. I built it as a full service commercial law firm. So we had tax lawyers, IP lawyers, real estate lawyers, so forth and so on. I'm a corporate lawyer, but I have a PhD in public policy. So I've written legislation for over 35 countries around the world, starting at the University of Denver, one of the first guys to be a cannabis professor at the University of Denver. So that was pretty fun. Clark Hill is a large firm. That's who I sold my firm to. Clark Hill has 750 lawyers. I run Clark Hill's Cannabis Industry Group, which includes, for our purposes, because they don't let us call it a cannabis and psychedelics industry group. It's a cannabis industry group, but we do psychedelics work in many jurisdictions around the world. So we'll talk about some of that, some of these evolving concepts. But we have a full service practice at Clark Hill. I also own a company called Gateway Proven Strategies, a leading global consultancy. They do projects all around the world. 90% of what they do are cannabis project build-outs. 11 of our 14 large-scale projects are outside the United States. So that's an interesting thing, but I don't say this to pat myself on the back as much as just to tell you guys who's talking to you. I also founded a company called C-Trust. C-Trust is sort of the Dun & Bradstreet in the cannabis industry. They provide credit ratings. As you might know, the last 14 years, there's been such little due diligence and so much money invested into the marijuana industry, all equity. That pendulum has swung the complete opposite direction, where it's all lending now in the United States, and high price lending. But there's exceptions to that. Technology, new markets like New Jersey, Missouri, things like that, New York. But mostly lending right now, so we provided a solution. I have a long-standing podcast called The Hoban Minute. There's over 200 episodes. It's on Apple. It's on every platform out there. If you're interested in anything I have to say, I write regularly for Forbes and the like. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But let's talk a little bit about what's happening with plant-based medicines. So first of all, who's here because their attachment to the cannabis industry in some form or fashion? So what I found, and what you'll find, is that cannabis industry people are now focused on the psychedelics industry in many ways. Why? Why is that, is the first thing to think about. And when I talk about psychedelics, I don't just mean psilocybin or magic mushrooms, for lack of a better way to put it. We're talking about ayahuasca, we're talking about mescaline, we're talking about ketamine, we're talking about peyote, even kratom or kratom fits into that purview, even though they're not all psychedelics as a scientific and technical matter. I'm talking about the public policy around all of these plant-based medicines and what's happening in the world. So why are the cannabis people migrating to psychedelics? There was just Cannadelic in Miami over the last couple of days, a big conference on the East Coast. Why are these conferences popping up? Well, I can tell you firsthand that the cannabis industry has become something that most of the activists, most of the people that wanted to see cannabis legalization occur, it's become something that they didn't want. Because it is about big business and it is about big money. We might not exactly see that here in Hawaii right now because it's a limited model, it's a medical marijuana model. But I would suggest, and I talked to some of our clients out on the floor out there, I don't understand when you have a medical program with a severe pain catch-all, that is the equivalent of an adult use cannabis program. So I don't understand what the holdup here is. Maybe it's a cultural thing that people won't walk into stores. But if I can have a severe pain catch-all, that means anybody, I mean anybody, can get a medical marijuana card. So then what would be the benefit of going to a dispensary versus going to a friend or someone that you maybe typically source your cannabis for in other states, maybe because the product variety is wider. The cannabis varieties are wider offerings, and maybe there's higher quality things in there that you can't get from your friend or your colleague or the guy down the street. That's kind of what I've been told, having not been in a dispensary, because the regulations are so strict that I can't go into a dispensary to visit it, even as a quote-unquote journalist writing for Forbes magazine, without going through an FBI background check 60 days in advance of my visit. So my daughter goes to the University of Hawaii, so I'm here often. So I reached out and I'm on the path to go visiting a couple of these places, but my point to you is those regulations are really strict in Hawaii. So the people that started to look at a commercial cannabis industry, they don't like what the cannabis industry's become, because it is suits, it is Wall Street money, it is overtaxed and overregulated. All of those things are true. It begs the question, as we look at a 10-year-old dispensary model in cannabis, whether that is the model going forward. The people in the marijuana industry, and yes, I'll use the word marijuana because that's the legal term. Cannabis is the industry. It's got a hemp sector and a marijuana sector. Don't let people tell you there's a hemp sector and a cannabis sector, because that's just stupid. It's marijuana and hemp. Cannabis is the whole thing, okay? It's got two distinct sectors. Yes, I understand the word marijuana has negative connotation historically, but we have to deal with that like we have to deal with statues of people in parks all around the country. That's just the way our history goes. So, it's become something we didn't want it to be. So we'll talk in a little bit about how we can avoid some of those pitfalls. How do we avoid psychedelics and natural medicine going the way that the marijuana industry's gone? But what I found is some of the early folks, they found themselves ostracized or on the outside of the cannabis industry. Maybe they didn't have a skill set that applied because it's big business. Maybe they thought it was going to be more friendly. Maybe they thought it was going to be more free and easy. Freeing the plant, legalization, is not exactly what happened. We freed the plant in a lot of ways, but we commercialized the plant in the most American way possible by creating a variety of product lines across the board. So those people are looking for something else that fills their heart, that fills their cup, that fills what they want to push. That's my hypothesis, which is largely true based on people I know. So they say, I don't want to work in the marijuana industry anymore. It doesn't fit what I wanted it to be. But maybe, just maybe, we can continue to help people. We can continue to open up forms of medicine that are natural in scope, help people, free those plants, free those, when we're talking about mushrooms, of course, it's not a plant necessarily as a fungus. But at the end of the day, that's why you see this. You also see this overlap because investor pools tend to be the same. These investors that have invested in marijuana, they like high risk, high reward. They want to be the first ones out there to do something so that maybe that first mover advantage creates economic opportunity in many ways. So investor pools are similar. Mindsets are similar in terms of the activists around the plants. So that's why you see a lot of overlap. Now, as we started to look at cannabis, we all know, there's not a question, hopefully in anyone's mind here, that cannabis has tremendous therapeutic benefits, right? From everything. I mean, I got into the cannabis space because my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She was told she had 6 months to live. So I grew up in New Jersey. I live in Colorado. My kids were very young. So when she was told she had 6 months to live, we moved her out to Colorado so that we could spend some time together. This was a short leash. Well, when I saw the toll that the opioids that she was using as the doctor prescribed just took on her, and just every day, just how miserable life was. You felt good for that hour-and-a-half period of time where the opiates hit their high, but then you needed maybe more the next day. Your stomach was never good. It was just a miserable existence. I'm no stranger to cannabis. So my mother, however, would never smoke anything, quite literally, to save her life. So my brother and I toyed with, brownies and cookies and things like that. But you know what happens when you make those things on your own. This bite makes you go to the moon. This bite makes you yawn a little bit. It was not exactly the experience that I was trying to show my mother you could get with medicinal cannabis. So ultimately, before dispensaries in Colorado, we began to source different compounds, extracts, crackers, cookies, things that people made that were quite effective. Now, at that point in time, and I studied this stuff, I didn't know that cannabis actually can reduce the size of tumors, that it actually cures cancer. Cristina Sanchez from Spain is one of the leading researchers in the world on this. This is a fact. And the fact that people don't know this in this day and age drives me nuts, that we're still talking exclusively about these chemical routines for cancer treatment. But that's kind of how I dipped into the world, at least initially, of plant-based medicine. I grew up in New Jersey. Everybody in New Jersey gets cancer because it's a stressful, not everybody, but it's a very high rate of cancer. It's a stressful, hard place to live. Everything is polluted. Everything is very, very hard to live around. So there's a high rate of cancer. So everything I grew up around was nobody was plant-based medicine. Nobody was talking about these things. This was, you go to the doctor, you do what the doctor says, so forth and so on. And I think my experience is so similar to what 90% of Americans have out there, because they don't know to look, and you just know to do what you're told and what other people have done. So as we start to think about what plant-based medicine means beyond, my journey began with cannabis. But as we looked at the THC components of marijuana, that's evolved. So now we look at the cannabinoids. I mean, Dr. Meshulam out of Israel is one of the leading researchers in the world, and so much science comes out concerning cannabinoids. But even Meshulam couldn't identify CBD till much later after he identified cannabinoids. And they still haven't identified the full range of cannabinoids and terpenes, flavonoids, and so forth and so on that exist in the plant. So we still don't know, despite that this plant has been our friend for millennia, we still don't know the full benefits of what that plant can do. But that opened the door to CBD. If you don't know anything about me, you'll know that if you looked it up, you would know that I sued the DEA in 2016. Prior to suing the DEA and prevailing on CBD, we devised a strategy for CBD sales in the US. These were derived from plants grown outside the United States, because prior to 2014, you couldn't grow hemp in the United States. It was deemed marijuana. There was no distinction between hemp and marijuana. You put a plant in the ground, you're doing something illegal. Plus, why would you grow hemp if you're going to take that risk? You're going to grow marijuana. All right. So we devised a strategy, and CBD started to become prevalent. My first two clients were the first two titans in the industry, Cannavest and Hemp Meds, out of San Diego, California. They were under one umbrella. Now they've transitioned. 2016, we sued the federal government because the 2014 Farm Bill said for the first time ever that hemp is different than marijuana. You can grow it, you can produce it, the derivatives are legal, you can sell it. So we started to see people use CBD because most people, I've found, don't want any sort of intoxicating effect from cannabinoids. My father's a great example of this. My dad comes out to Colorado from where he lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He wants to go golfing for the day, so I take him golfing. He comes back, oh, my shoulder hurts, my neck hurts. I said, Dad, I got something for you. He says, what? I know about you guys in Colorado, I don't want that. I go, no, this is different. This is CBD. You're not gonna get high. God forbid, right? But you're not gonna get high. And he liked that. So again, this is my little illustrations of why I've seen people like different product lines. And now we see CBN, we see THCV, we see so many different isolated and formulatory compounds that come from a hemp plant. Same compounds that are in a marijuana plant, but hemp is freer and easier to grow, and it's legal federally, so why not avail yourself of that? So as we saw those things evolve, we started to see more and more beneficial use of the plant as a whole. Now, as I was just talking to somebody out there, the disconnect on the marijuana or the cannabis side is that, let me give you another example. My son, 10 years old, he's got ADD, he needs to take these pills. I don't want him taking pills. I barely take an ibuprofen myself. Okay, so then I call this guy from Harvard University, who's deceased now, Lester Grinspoon, one of the leading guys in the world. He's written about this for decades and decades and decades. His book, The World's Most Misunderstood Plant, is sort of in everyone that studies this scientifically, it's in their bookshelf. I call him, he answers the phone. I He said, here's the deal. My son's being told to prescribe this methamphetamine, basically Ritalin or the like. I don't feel comfortable with that. I've taken one just to see what it was like. I don't like speed. I'm not a speed guy. And it was a speedy thing, and this was like a minimum dose. Like, how could this be good? Oh, that would affect him differently because he actually has a need. You just took it to see what it was like, so it sends you speedy, but it speeds up other people's brains and balances them out. I said, I still don't like that. You wrote an article, a study, about how ADD, ADHD, and cannabis work together. How do you translate that? Because you're talking about this many milligrams of this. I need to know what strain you suggest I use. I need to know what mechanism. How do I get my son to ingest this on a regular basis? Because that's the disconnect. The science says one thing, but then how do I translate that science? What if I don't know anything about cannabis and I'm not forward thinking, and let's say I'm 67 years old and I have a condition that I know that hemp can, or cannabinoids can help with? Where do I go? My doctor's gonna say, yeah, you should try it. All right, so then how do I try it? I go to a store. I'm gonna talk to a 25-year-old guy at the counter who's gonna tell me, oh yeah, this makes you feel this way and that way. I don't malign the 25-year-old bud tender, but at the same time, there's no connection there. There's no way to translate the science into how you use it on a regular basis. So that's been one of the challenges that we've identified from day one in this space. Now, psychedelics. Psychedelics is all the rage. And as I mentioned, all of these products that I mentioned a few moments ago, they kind of fit into this psychedelics realm if they're not technically psychedelics. But it represents the broader movement of plant-based medicines. Let's look at the states that have moved forward in some way in this area. So, of course, you've got Denver, Colorado, the city, first saying we're not going to penalize people for possessing psychedelics, psilocybin. But that was just an exception to enforcement. It didn't apply statewide. It was just the city of Denver. Then a ballot measure happens. Colorado decides it's going to effectively make all of these products decriminalized. But that decriminalization is not commercialization. Remember that. It's pretty obvious to most people, but decriminalization is not commercialization. So just because I say you're not going to get arrested for this does not mean that you can commercialize it and sell it, and that's a big disconnect for many in the industry. But if you look today, just about anywhere you go, including on the floor out here, gummies, chocolates, tinctures, capsules. One of our clients produces, he calls the 2-hour trip. It's a capsule. And I'll be damned if it is not like 2 hours on the head from the time you start to feel it to the time you stop to feel it, and it doesn't drop you off a cliff. That's more good for a recreational purpose, but the same concept applies. People that microdose, right? People that use psilocybin and other products like that on a regular basis to balance depression, to balance brain chemistry or the like. These are the things that America is plagued with. We're plagued with advertisements for every drug known to man. 3 out of 5 of those advertisements have to do with something with depression or with mental illnesses, for lack of a better way to put it. And we know that plant-based medicine can assist in those things, particularly microdosing and psilocybin or the like. Now, one of the things that I'm going to say, because it sounds bold, is cannabis is a gateway drug. I don't mean it's a gateway drug the way you think that we've said it's a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug to legislators. Legislators around the world look at what happened with cannabis, and they're more open now to saying, let's legalize psilocybin. There was no terrible effects in society when we legalized cannabis or marijuana, and they're opening the door to legalizing it. And you have many other jurisdictions that do that. You've got, Oakland, California was like Denver, Washington, D.C., Oregon came out and effectively decriminalized a laundry list of drugs, and those are being utilized for beneficial purposes to this day. We've got legislation proposed currently in at least a handful of states: Utah, Missouri, Connecticut, New Jersey, Texas, even California. And everybody thinks of California as being progressive, but California is almost so left that it wraps around to the right. Right? It's if you don't do things this way, it's just not tolerated in a certain respect. So California, that they're moving forward on things like this is important. Now, psilocybin is a Schedule I substance like marijuana, but we don't hear that rhetoric when we talk about psilocybin and microdosing. You don't hear it's a Schedule I substance all the time. In fact, it surprises some people when they learn it's a Schedule I substance because of the fact that legislators, federal government agencies are willing to talk about how we're going to facilitate research We're going to fund research surrounding these things to help people with mental health issues and depression. Whereas when you talk about marijuana, it's just the end-all be-all. It's a Schedule I substance. It's bad for a reason. We don't want to open up the door. So it's an interesting concept there. But what I say is, how do you make money with psychedelics? And I ask that question because who's going to start an industry unless there's an opportunity for some sort of economic upside? We all want to help people, but we can only do that to the extent that our lives allow for us to do that. Some people do that in their spare time. Some people do that for a living. So when you have an industry that's new, that has so much promise, how do you make money in psychedelics? And that's an important question to ask, because people say, I want to go into psychedelics. I say, well, how are you going to pay the bills? How long is it going to take for this to evolve so that it's an industry? And then we'll talk about how that industry can avoid the pitfalls of cannabis. Well, when you're looking at how do you make money, first thing that comes to mind is you can go to a decriminalized marketplace and you can grow mushrooms. And if anyone's ever grown a mushroom or knows how mushrooms grow, they grow fast. You can grow quite a large quantity of mushrooms in a very, very short period of time, all inside. So it's gone before anybody knew it was happening. So that facilitates a bit of a gray or black market. But when it's decriminalized, that doesn't necessarily allow for commerce. That tends to be the case. But when you have these formulations, people will take other mushrooms. They'll call it functional blend plus. So functional mushrooms, some of those out on the floor as well. In fact, a really, really good variety package. It's a fiber. They don't have any psychoactive or psychedelic mushrooms in that blend. So it's easy to grow functional mushrooms and mix psychedelic mushrooms into your formulation. Put it into a capsule, put it into a gummy, put it into a chocolate. You can sell those, or they're being sold at head shops, gas stations, and the like. Doesn't mean it's legal. It's decriminalized, the one component of it, but you're also sort of misrepresenting to your consumer what's in the product, because you're not putting on the bottle, this will make you trip, or this will present some sort of psychedelic effect. You're saying it's a functional mushroom blend, so you're sort of burying it in there. Some people are a little more bold than that. They'll actually create a product that just says, you know, to the moon. I literally have a client, I got one client called Billy Zonka, like Willy Wonka, but it's Billy Zonka, you know, and then the graphics on the packaging are, you know, are meant to indicate that take this and you're gonna, you know, you're gonna have a great experience. But that's not legal, that's decriminalized. And that's a little bit dishonest because you're not representing to your consumers what you're selling. So that's the first way people are making money in the space. I'm not a huge proponent of that. There are other law firms that do specifically that. There's tons of people doing that. But that's not a sustainable business. Second way you can make money in psychedelics is retreats. How do you create a private atmosphere where we can be friends, we can be family, we can just know each other, and everybody's understanding that we're going to have a gathering on a private place. There's going to be food, everyone's going to be taken care of, but this is going to be a psychedelic experience. So you see a lot of these places happening, right? Now, the danger with that is it's also not necessarily a regulated scenario, because I'm still selling my services to the public, even though I fashion it as a private gathering. So all it really takes is one law enforcement officer undercover to go to one of these things and say, I see what they're doing, and then they go back and open up an investigation, and something's likely to occur. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, but I understand the concepts, and that would open up the door to challenges. But it is a second way that people are making money. So how do you get around that? You go to Oregon. Oregon, where that's not an issue, Oregon has psychedelic retreats all over the place. Latin American countries in particular, especially when you start to look at other things like ayahuasca, there are places where you can go do psychedelics or mental health retreats and have an experience. And there's a number of clients that we have that operate across Latin America in that space. One of my favorites is a guy named Jonathan Schwartz, who has a place outside of Medellin, Colombia, which is just amazing. The people that have come out of there after this experience, their lives have changed, almost without exception. I mean, there's a couple people that have a very, very bad time because something is really challenging in their life, and maybe they need a couple of sessions. But most people, by and large, that come out of that are very happy. That's the second way to make money in psychedelics. Third way to make money in psychedelics. It's a bet on distribution. Who's going to sell psychedelics? If in fact plant-based medicines and psychedelics are becoming looser and more available to people, where is it going to be sold? Are there going to be psychedelics dispensaries like we have with cannabis? Are they going to be sold in other stores? Are doctors going to have to prescribe this? And by the way, let me just take a side note on that concept. Everything we're talking about, we're talking about natural compounds. Start with cannabis, a flower, an oil, something from the plant. That's my choice. I want something natural. But most Americans don't. They want the pill. They want the pill that gives them the formulation that is derived from this. This is the pharmaceutical lane. This is the medical lane. This is what I'd call the natural products or the naturopath type lane. They're always going to exist side by side because this complex is too wealthy and too expensive, and there's too many hurdles to participate here, but they're going to proceed because people want alternatives. This lane is something that maybe people like us and people at a conference like this are more open to, which is not your average American or your average person, I would suggest, based on experience. So coming back to that, you got these things side by side. Where's the natural products on the psychedelics or the natural medicine side going to be distributed? So the bet by many people, one of our clients, and I'll mention the company just because they're in the press on this all the time, but Irwin Naturals. Anyone heard of Irwin Naturals? One of the largest nutraceutical companies in the world. They started a CBD company. They're a top 3 CBD brand. They license their branding to marijuana production in multiple states, and now they're doing one thing in particular, well, 2 things. They're buying ketamine clinics. Ketamine clinics get a bad name. Well, ketamine helps people. I don't know much about ketamine. It's one thing I certainly have not tried to date. People speak highly of it. Some people say it's just horrible from the same group of people. But the point is, that's a bet on distribution. If you buy ketamine clinics, in theory, you'll have a corner on the market for where these products will be distributed in the future. So that's what Irwin Naturals is doing. They're going out and buying ketamine clinics all over the country. And that gives them a bad name in certain circles because they go, oh, ketamine. But it's sort of missing the point. The point is, I want the distribution. That's a bet. And I mean a bet because we don't know how these things are going to be distributed in the future. So betting on distribution, that's the third way. The fourth way to make money with psychedelics is formulations, right? How do I mix things together so that people can be treated? Maybe you mix multiple herbs, multiple psychedelics in the same compound, multiple varieties of the same psychedelic mushrooms and psychedelic plants, and then you protect those formulations with intellectual property protection. So that's another way people are investing, and another way that people are starting to make money. But it begs the question to me, when you sell cannabis, I think it's 11% of people use cannabis regularly, however they define that as. That number really hasn't changed. So even with dispensaries, the number is about 11%, maybe 8 to 11%. What do you think the percentage of people that use psychedelics on a regular basis? Yeah, I've heard it's under 5, but I don't know what the specific number is. But if you're looking at 2 or 3% of the people, again, that begs the question, how am I going to make money in the space? And again, I'm not trying to paint a picture that's all about money, but to create an industry, it has to be about money because you have to have a foundation that's based on business. 2 or 3% of the people, you either have to charge a lot for each product or you have to mix it with other things, hence the bet on the ketamine clinic distribution side of things. So those are some challenging ways that you have to look at this space because we all want to see this happen. We see it happening. We've seen friends, family, otherwise that their lives have improved by using these compounds. But what does the future look like? And how can we beat the pharmaceutical people to the punch? And when I say beat it, people are going to try this, they're going to try that. That's just human nature. But on this side of the equation, when you're looking at an isolated compound, is that going to be as effective as something that occurs in nature? That maybe I extract directly from the plant in its full nature, or from the mushroom in this case, and then provide it in a way that interacts with your body. So the laws are beginning to recognize and reflect this. Now you have another company, another client of ours, a company called Umbo. Umbo produces functional mushrooms. If you remember a quarterback for the Denver Broncos called Jake Plummer owns Umbo. He's a heck of a guy. He lives a healthy lifestyle, but they produce functional mushrooms, functional mushroom blends. They don't mess around with the psychedelics. Well, but people go to them and they buy these products thinking it's a psychedelic brand, but it's a functional brand. And functional mushrooms, of course, help with sharpening your brain and so many other things. I mean, if you go out and talk to Joseph right outside the door here, he can tell you everything about the benefits. And by the way, I mean this sincerely. He's got his mushroom fiber blend out there. It's $75 for a bag of it, but it is remarkable in terms of how it makes you feel after using it for about 10 days and the like. But that's not psychedelic. That is functional mushroom blend. So that sort of blends in with this concept. But remember, psychedelics are still Schedule 1, or at least psilocybin is. Then we've got MDMA, we've got ibogaine, we've got all of these other compounds. Who's familiar with kratom or kratom? Kratom is a plant produced in Southeast Asia and Indonesia in particular, although it's grown in many regions of the world. Historically, this has been, maybe like kava, it's been used for millennia. But there's scientific studies behind kratom or kratom, and that's legal in the United States. Kratom helps with depression. And we see that sold, unfortunately, they're still sold at head shops and pipe shops and tobacco stores. And I say unfortunately because if I'm going to buy something that I'm going to try for medicine, should I have to walk into a pipe and tobacco store, or should I have something else that's an option? Well, so then this opens the door to what Colorado recently did, which, as I understand it, for those of us in Hawaii, or those of you in Hawaii, and I could get some of this wrong because I've only learned about this in the last couple of days, but Hawaii does have a law that allows basically therapeutic clinics. It doesn't identify specifically that compounds used within those clinics are legal or not, but it says that you have the right to go out and operate this clinic and treat people, quote unquote, treat people with certain types of plant-based medicines. Well, so that allows for the treatment. But then Colorado took it to another extreme. They said, we're going to license and regulate this almost like dispensaries, and it provides a long laundry list of all of the compounds that I mentioned that can ultimately be used in that treatment in Colorado. So if you go to Colorado, the license rules will come out at the end of this year. They'll start to allow applications for people to get these licenses in early 2024. And then you're going to have these therapeutic-based clinics where people can go and receive treatment and be taught how to use these compounds in what form or fashion. It sort of bridges that gap I was trying to talk about earlier that says, okay, maybe I suffer from depression. What the heck does microdosing even mean? So should I buy a bag of mushrooms off of my friend and then grind it up and put it in a capsule? By the way, if you've tried that, I remember my brother told me, he says, I took these echinacea capsules and I took them apart and I ground up all the mushrooms that I had left over and I put them in there. I figured that was a microdose. I said, how did it go? He said, I just wanted to see how powerful it was. So I took one before I went to a Home Depot on a Sunday afternoon. And he says 5 hours later, I was still walking around Home Depot. My point to you is that how do you know what a microdose really is, right? How do you know how to try to use these compounds so it doesn't disrupt your immediate life and maybe give you a bad experience that prevents you from really opening your eyes and seeing the full benefit of what that plant is? This is the gap I was talking about with dispensaries. If I know scientifically this helps, and I know I can buy it here or not get arrested for possessing it or growing it here, what's the in between? And the answer can't be, I have to do my own research. Because research means Google, and Google means trash more often than not, unless you're really, really sharp. So how do you bridge that gap? I think these clinics, these therapeutic venues are a place where people can learn how to use these products and these compounds for the benefit. Does anyone know anyone that's been to a clinic like that, or been to even a ceremony like I was describing earlier? So is that the safe way to do it, though? Is that if you don't know anything about it, is it the safe way to go to a place where you're sort of guided through the process? Or is the safe way to sort of buy a product that says, only take one of these, take two of these? Or is it a combination of all the above?
Probably depends on the person attending, how open they are to the experience.
Sure. So those are the challenges with plant-based medicine. Plus, we're inundated with commercials, we're inundated with people that take a regimen of pills on a regular basis. This is perceived as normal, and if I'm doing something that's abnormal, then my doctor, my friends are going to probably say something about it. As an example, I went to my annual physical a couple of weeks ago, and the doc says, "So what medications are you on?" I said, "I took ibuprofen because I had a headache last week, but I'm not on any. You're X years old and you don't take any medications." He was surprised, almost like, shame on you. And but he did ask, he knows what I do for a living. He says, "So do you use cannabis on a regular basis?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he says, "Well, you smoke it?" Sometimes. And he says, "Well, smoking's not good." So he was just looking for something to say, what you're doing is not good enough, because if you really wanted this, you would go do this. But that's kind of the education of the medical community right now. So you really do need this gap bridged where you have these holistic healing centers and these venues where people can actually go. Now, as I wrote down a sort of a top 10 list of issues that are going to come up in the context of psychedelics or plant-based medicine that mirror the issues that we see in cannabis. The first would be federal illegality. Many of these compounds are federally illegal. Even if the state legalizes it or provides a venue for use of these products, you're still consuming something that's federally illegal. That matters to people. Again, I tell a brief story about my mother. My mother would not have used cannabis because it was federally illegal unless I got her the card from Colorado that says, now you're allowed to use this. It's still federally illegal, but you're allowed to use it in Colorado. She really was hung up. She's dying, and she's hung up on breaking the law. That still blows my mind to this day, because I would never think of that. If there was something that could help me, I wouldn't care whether it was legal or not, if I was really in that situation. But I think a lot of people are that way. It's just how you're indoctrinated, how you're raised, so forth and so on. So you got the federal illegality issue, and that hurts the people that are providing the treatment as well, because what they're providing, they're not really technically providing it. It's kind of like coffee shops in the Netherlands. They're not allowed to really sell these things. It's tolerated. Where does it come from? Nobody asks. How many grams can you possess on site? Nobody knows where it comes from. It goes, and I know this because I represent many of these coffee shops, and my daughter works at one. But my point is, it's like, where does the material that you're putting forth in this therapeutic session come from, and if it's federally legal, how can I possess it, and what can I do with it? That presents many challenges. Those challenges come through with contracts. In the early days of cannabis, and I was the business lawyer saying, guys, if you're going to do this deal, you better enter into a contract. I'm not putting my name on a contract. I'm incriminating myself. All right, we're going to have to get over that issue right away. What you're doing is federally illegal. There's no way around that. But everything else that's happening is legal under state law. And I advise you to operate like any other business under state law, because it protects you. Because without contracts, you're really exposing yourself. Well, you're going to have the same problem when you enter into any contracts around many of these compounds and properties because of the federal illegality. So that's another issue that becomes a challenge. Tax issues. If you know anything about tax issues for marijuana businesses, they're not allowed to deduct ordinary expenses. It's something called 280E. So I might make $1 million, but I'm taxed 80% of the million. 80%. Most businesses are taxed in the, it depends on what expenses you have, but you're looking at 20 to 35%. In the best case scenario in a marijuana business, it's 65%, because you're shifting everything and you're separating all these things. Well, same thing's going to apply for psychedelics. So you're going to have major tax issues. So if you can't generate some dollars to begin with, then you're going to have challenges going forward. Banking, for the same reasons I just described, banking is going to be a problem if you have a psychedelics or a plant-based medicine business. You can't get trademarks. Federal trademarks are off limits if you're protecting something that necessarily involves a illegal or scheduled substance. There's ways around that. I sell apparel that happens to say Bob's 420 store, not because I have Bob's 420 store as a stupid example, but I think you get the point. There's ways around that. Bankruptcy is not allowed presently for marijuana businesses because it's federally illegal. So if you invest a bunch of money in a ketamine clinic or the like, you might end up in the same scenario where you have no insolvency protection if your business goes under because of the federal illegality issue. Let's see what we got here. RICO, the organized crime, you're still selling something that's illegal, so even if you're doing something beneficial and you're helping people, you're still exposing yourself to potential RICO. We haven't really seen much of that. I attribute that to the fact that the federal government has put policies in place that effectively allow these businesses to operate. But all that takes is one conservative attorney general, again, like Jeff Sessions, or a conservative Republican. Frankly, I don't want to pick on the Republicans because the Democrats have been terrible on cannabis policy. The Republicans probably own the issue a little bit better, but they can't get over some of these things. But it doesn't take much to look at federal charges. Leasing, insurance, and the big issue is immigration. What about immigration? You know, there's many Canadians in the cannabis industry that won't bring their cell phones with them because they have sons and daughters that go to school in the United States and they travel here, and if they go to the border, either the U.S. officials or would ask them for their cell phone if they find anything about cannabis on there, and you can't tell them that they can't have your cell phone at the border. What happens there, and they can bar you from entering the country. That's for marijuana. So let alone if you're involved in high-ranking or high-profile businesses selling these other therapeutic compounds, and you advertise that. So immigration is a big issue, and you know, people certainly before 2020 and COVID, but increasingly again, this is a global environment we all operate in. People work and live all around the world, and if I'm going to do something in one jurisdiction, and it's legal there, and I come back to the United States and it's not legal, there's going to be potential implications, especially if you're not comfortable sort of misrepresenting what you do for a living. And I mean that. Like, so if I go in, I work for the Colombian government, so I come back and forth to Colombia all the time. I can't tell you how many times I get stopped in the Houston airport. Mr. Hope, what do you do for? I'm a lawyer. What industry do you? I service the agricultural industry. Colombia is rich in agriculture. How much money do you have on you? What does that mean? I don't have any money. I got $100 in my pocket, whatever, you know. They think that everybody's a lawyer for the cartel, and that you're, but the same thing applies. Well, what industry do you operate in? Some people will say, I'm in the cannabis industry. No, don't say that. You just opened the door. But if you're in the psychedelics industry, the same principles apply for immigration and traveling back and forth. So how can the psychedelics industry, the natural products industry, the natural treatment industry avoid the problems that we saw with the cannabis industry? And if anybody's got any thoughts, please just raise your hand and let's talk about it, because this is something that I struggle with on a daily basis, because I hate to say it, I'm a little cynical as I get older, but I don't know how you can avoid it. I think that these clinics present an opportunity for holistic treatment. And I think that people that are open to those opportunities will get the experience that they hope for, sort of as you described. But not everybody's going to do that. And of course, this isn't for everybody anyway, necessarily, or wouldn't be people's choices because they don't understand it well enough. But how can you avoid creating something that helps people, that generates dollars, that the pharmaceutical complex is certainly pursuing at the same time, again, on this other side of the line, without creating opportunities to make money? And when you create opportunities to make money, don't you just open the door to having things go the way of the cannabis industry? And I'm comfortable in the cannabis industry, but so many people are not. It's not what they wanted. They're not happy with it. They wish it would just go away, or they continue to think, well, it should just be free and easy. We should be able to do what we want with the plant. Look, in a perfect world, I'd love to see that with every plant. But this is America in 2023. It's not the way it works. Everything is overtaxed and overregulated. It just is. And I think we have to recognize that. So if cannabis and psychedelics are on that same pathway, how can we avoid the pitfalls that we've seen with the psychedelics industry? How do you avoid it? Well, some of the measures we've seen put in place are you can only own a certain number of these clinics, maybe one or two. Maybe there's 5 limited in each state. Maybe you're not actually selling the compounds, you're just providing the therapeutic benefit. And so the economic model is not really there because you're not selling the compounds that provide the high price point. You're just providing the services. But where there's money and therapeutic benefit, that's where people are looking to make additional dollars and to establish chains and international or national business. And when you start tying these things together, dollars mean more than they ever did when you started, and if dollars mean more, then don't you deliver less of a service, less of a product, and ultimately, you know, have an industry that is no longer about the results, and it's about the dollars and the business model at the outset. And that's one of the things that I'm trying desperately to think through and understand, because we can have influence on public policy in different states right now as it relates to the development of these natural plant-based medicines and psychedelics and the like. But if we wait too long, this model will mimic the cannabis model. And again, I'm comfortable with the cannabis model, but most people are not. So how do we avoid that? Limits on the number of stores. Perhaps it's, you know, and this is another thing to think about. The FDA rules don't prohibit natural compounds from being utilized as ingredients in therapeutics or drug formulations. We just don't see it a lot because it's not cost effective for them. Even, for example, you know, what's the first cannabis drug approved? Sativex, years ago. That's a synthetic THC. Marinol, similar. We have CBD being derived naturally for Epidiolex. But you can use natural-based compounds. You just don't see it a lot in the United States because it's easier and more, if this is a word, replicatable in the industry when you produce a compound synthetically or through a lab process than if you derive it from nature. So these are some of the challenges that we see, but we know that the promise is great. But it's also maligned. When you come back from a Peruvian ayahuasca retreat and you're enlightened and you feel great and you sorted things out, what do your friends and your family say? Well, most naturally people are going to look and go, oh, you went to the jungle and did what? You know, so forth and so on. So how do you bridge that gap too? Because people need these things. People need to be healed. People need alternatives that are not going to a doctor and be given a pill. What kind of questions do you guys have as we look at this and this evolves? And just any thoughts? Because like I said, I'm here to learn as well as to sort of try to give you a little snapshot of what I see going on. I want to learn what questions you have, but what are the perspectives? Because I want to give this industry a fighting chance, and I just feel like the cards are almost stacked against it in many ways on the natural side of things, and I think that's where most people are going to benefit. So how can we create public policy, navigate a business model that actually does allow this to thrive and survive? Did you have a question?
I would say, comment, as an MP, where is, what can I do, not to do the achievement, but where is it, how can I, other than showing the task force discussions and that kind of thing, because I'm not, for me, it's not the business, it's the therapeutic aspect.
Yes.
And it's such a different, even with the kind of, you know, with the marijuana use, it's such a, for me, sometimes it's a dichotomy because I'm not into the big business and there's a lot of money to be made. I'm more like, I want to be able to just do a therapeutic use and help the patient, but it's such a, for me, it's so, there's this bias in between the two.
Yes.
And, you know, what can I do from my end to help support this not getting to be such the suits and the
Sure. Well, what I've seen other physicians or treaters sometimes do, because they're not always educated in medicine or the human body, they produce their own products. So you can do that, and that doesn't mean you have to make it yourself, but you align with people that have that capability and, you know, that little supply chain concept, and you produce products that have your fingerprint on it, which, by the way, is a nice way to sort of, you know, put your fingerprints on what people are consuming. But that's a whole, that requires money, that requires, you know, thought on formulations. How do you work with somebody else that might be more advanced? So that would be my suggestion. Again, it's that communication of there's a scientific reason to try this, there's demonstrable therapeutic benefit, but what do you take to get there that's still the question with these things, because if most people want to go to a doctor, and the doctor's going to say, oh yeah, this stuff is great, go try it, but they can't say, go to this store or that store or otherwise, that becomes ultimately the challenge. So I think you can look at your own formulations, experiment with yourself and your friends. I have lots of people and lots of clients and friends that do that. And then they come up with their own products. And those products are not intended to generate, there's always a cost associated with it because it's created and it costs money to create it, but you're not necessarily putting it out into the marketplace. And then you never know. If you see that people are really reacting positively to it, then maybe you want to push it into a business concept. But in the first instance, I think that's probably what an option might be. But we need more physicians and MDs to understand these concepts so that they can push it and not go, I don't know anything about that, go figure it out for yourself, which is what I think most doctors do, right? But yeah, you guys.
So if you open up your own therapeutic clinic, you're trying to legally come up with ways to protect yourself, would it be ideal to have like somebody else supply the medicine, one person buys the space, the therapist kind of does the initial interview? I'm trying to think of practicalities in that. How do you protect the therapist? Is there, I imagine if they're all broken up, that might make it harder to take down, or is that?
No, you make a good point. Again, it's this coffee shop model. The coffee shop just sells coffee. We might have an idea in the back where we sell hash and marijuana, but we don't produce that on site. And by the way, anytime anybody walks in the front door, all that stuff goes out the back door before you can, blink an eye. I think, unfortunately, that's you have to sequester those things. It's not apples to apples, but as an example, I have a client that does, it's called Cultivated Spirits. He does cannabis pairing cannabis pairing dinners. Well, he can't supply the cannabis. The dispensaries can't supply the cannabis. So the chef can't supply the cannabis. So the person brings the cannabis by, and and it's not part of the experience, but it's part of the experience. So you kind of keep things in different boxes, at least how you think about it, even though we're all friends and we're going to do this and you're going to bring this, and I think it's keeping everything sequestered in that respect.
I thought producing any kind of, well, it's still true that producing any psychedelics was particularly egregious to them, like a part of the competence between LSD, they're going to
Yes.
come down here for 10, 20 years for sure.
Yeah.
Is that still true, or is that anything else?
LSD, so LSD was sort of the first push towards alternative psychedelic treatment, of course, years and years and years ago. But because of the time and because of messaging and politics, and because people took way too much of it, and it did have adverse impacts on so many people, people aren't talking about that as much. So you're looking at natural compounds mostly in these days versus something that's specifically derived from a lab.
Because LSD is supposed to have never any negative research.
That's
it's all political. LSD is probably going to avoid this point.
At this point, well, look, if the clinical environment registration allows you to treat people but doesn't prescribe what you can or cannot treat people with, and if that's something that you understand and and that you can lawfully and consistently source that material, then I think that would be legal business under the treatment model, but the sale and procurement of it becomes the part where you're going to have to not talk about until it just kind of appears, we use it, and move on from there. So, and capture data on it so that you can prove that you're not harming anybody. There's no negligence in addressing and interacting with other human beings. So, you had a question, sir?
Yeah. What is the comparison of the addressable market or popularity of use between psychedelic and cannabis?
Yeah, like we were talking, just general numbers before. It's less than 5%, probably 3% people that have used these versus 8 to 11% on a regular basis. So how that translates into numbers, take a given population and pack it down. People are far more willing to try a non-intoxicating form of cannabis than they would be to try even a microdose component. I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine, she's a lawyer in Mexico. There was a conference just 2 days ago in Merida on the Yucatan Peninsula, and it was a cannabis scientific conference. And of course, anytime you're talking about cannabis science, the doctors there tend to look at these other compounds, and so some of them actually make their own formulations. So they brought mushroom chocolates and all these things. So she calls me and she says, I ate Hango de chocolate, you know, that was great. And I said, okay, so how do you feel? Oh, I feel great. An hour later, she's like, oh my God, I don't know. And this was a supposed microdose. My point is, you just don't know how people are going to react. It's going to take coaxing for her to ever try anything like that ever again. And she's open to these things because the first experience with this quote unquote microdose was too much. So that's going to be another problem of keeping the door open, which is why you do need a clinical setting or a therapeutic environment with people that can be your guide to try these things. Otherwise, you're setting people up for failure, unfortunately. But from an economic model, the numbers don't seem to support it on its own. But in a clinical environment with a bunch of the other compounds I was describing, I think that there's opportunity there, and I think you'll see that begin to become embraced at the state level, and then you'll probably see FDA push back in 3 or 4 or 5 years to go, we don't know anything about these compounds, because remember, the FDA tends to ignore the science that's out there. They're still asking for people to show that CBD is safe. Well, there's studies, you know, going back into the 90s about CBD specifically and how safe it is. And yet the FDA is going, oh, we can't recognize those things. We have to do this ourselves. So again, it's this kind of process. It becomes a pendulum swing. It's open, it's good, let's try it. And then the FDA sort of sends a message out there that chills business and sends a message to people that you shouldn't try these things. Yes, sir.
I mean, but isn't really the problem, I mean, the biggest problem in moving into plant-based relationship between big pharma and the federal government? I mean, you know, they're going to want to do, as you just said a little while ago, what the holistic side is doing.
Yeah.
The whole point is they want to own the whole market, so they're buying the politicians and basically doing what they've always done.
They have.
So, I mean, to me, I think that's the biggest obstacle.
But here's how I see it. I agree with you, but I see it evolving a little bit differently. Because let me take CBD as an example. I mean, it's CBD, so it's a game changer in many ways, but it's CBD. We kind of, you know, we've seen. By the way, we haven't even begun to see what's going to happen with CBD when the federal government does create FDA rules. You're going to see CBD in every single product. Your toothpaste, Coca-Cola with CBD. I mean, mainstream products will have CBD in it in the future once the FDA rules come out. So I think we haven't really begun to see how much CBD will enter into the marketplace and other non-intoxicating compounds like that. But to that point, pharmaceutical companies went out years ago and got as many patents as they can on CBD formulations. They saw this coming. Presumably, they've done the same thing with different forms of psychedelics and otherwise. So then what happens if I sell a natural product? I'm a natural CBD producer in this example. I represented this group out of Conifer, Colorado. They produced full spectrum product. They started making money and getting attention. They were in Forbes magazine. Pharmaceutical companies, lawyers knock on the door. You guys are infringing on our patent. Oh, okay, let's get one of my patent lawyers involved. Let's figure out a defense here. We figure out all this stuff. We call them. They say, we don't want to shut you down. We just want you to know we have this patent. Every single thing you say infringes on our patent, infringes on our patent. So sign this document and the lawsuit goes away. And you just have to pay us 10 cents for every unit you sell. So that's how I see them playing in this field. Let the first movers take all the arrows. And then the ones that survive, the pharmaceutical companies will either buy them out or they'll already know they're making a piece of revenue off of those companies. It's kind of the way I see it evolving, which is a slightly different way than freeze them out, stop them, because we're going to do this. I think they see this, rightfully so, as so early in the game that I'm willing to just take pennies off of every sale and let you guys plow the ground. And if your company becomes successful and you're already paying me 10 cents a unit, maybe I'll buy you out and that becomes my brand, or we'll just crush you because we learned by you guys making mistakes and we've got more money and more resources.
So big firms already got it.
They definitely have the IP protection on just about everything. You know, there's billions of dollars worth of personnel dedicated to that and that only. So.
There's much chance to reverse too, where a small formulator comes up with a good product and you're able to get royalties from bigger companies for reasons that happen very much, or is that? I mean, I know it can happen.
You can, but it's really got to be technology based. You have to show that it's technology based for a pharmaceutical company to want to license something from you. If it's formulation based, then they'll they'll try to replicate it. If it's technology based and you've patent protected it or IP protected it, and sometimes you don't even need to go through the formal process. If it's used for a certain period of time before they do something, you have common law rights. I'm not an IP lawyer, but I have them on my staff. And that's the way I understand it. So, yes, sir.
I mean, just like a general comment, but like, I mean, the way I see it going is, I mean, I think at least, I mean, so basically what I do is I also have a graduate degree in policy studies and have spent pretty much my entire career doing cannabis licensing and policy studies. In fact, even like working with foreign governments on that as well. So I mean, I kind of like, you know, please feel free to push back and think this I'm wrong. I think, you know, I'm right. The way I see psychedelics is that we're about 10 years behind marijuana right now, roughly, or so, where that was 10 years ago. I see it going in a similar way. I see it, you know, in terms of licensing, being restrictive, being really limited licensing. I also see the operating like expenditures. Like for example, in Hawaii, the originally licenses issued in 2015 had showed us a $1 million cap. Like I see like significant capital requirements. I see merit-based application systems that also are going to, like compliant real estate is going to be a huge issue because there's probably going to be very few locations. It's going to be either hyper-liberal cities and liberal states or places that like are just hungry for tax revenue, like desert hot springs out in California, which is like the only place in California that allows cannabis to start with, so, or marijuana to start with. So I think you're going to see that, and I think obviously you're going to start seeing change. You're going to see in-state change. You're going to see MSOs, and I think obviously you're going to see then consolidation. I also do think that, I mean, feel free to push back, right? I don't really think you're going to see as many chains of clinics. I think clinics are going to continue to exist, but the way I see it is I imagine it going more to a dispensary type model as things become more developed. I think the clinics are going to still exist, but I think they're more of like a quirky, almost kind of like pre-licensing type, almost like dinosaurical thing that like will exist, but like won't be the main source of that. That's kind of what I imagine. That's just kind of how I see it. I think another thing that's harder now is that like, especially with the crash in like cannabis values, I mean like investors are hard. Like, you know, I go to global cannabis finance conferences, like after all the scandals happened in Europe, like Juicy Field's huge collapse, other scandals. In the US, I mean like I have most of my life savings in cannabis stocks. They're down 70%. I'm holding forever, but like it's down like, you know, 70%. So it's like, you know, right now, like even capital is hard to come by. So I think we're going to see not the same, you know, quote unquote green rush because like people have been, some of the people in that have been burned, so then you're having, it's still going to be capital, but it's going to be less free-flowing than it was maybe at the beginning of that like 10 years ago.
How do you think, based on your background, we avoid the problems that dispensaries have in that space?
I mean, a lot of the ways that a lot of the laws are written are really stupid. I mean, I think a lot is like the federal issues like you mentioned too, like access to banking receipts, like IRC 280, just like kneecaps everyone. I mean, like, I get my checks from a random small, I don't even work for a dispensary, I work for a consulting company, but my paycheck comes from a small-ass community bank in New Mexico. It's some people who would bank with us. Like, sometimes you get paid fees, like, because of that. Like, it's, you know, you see, like, inconsistencies. Like, a lot of those things are going to be huge. But, I mean, outside of that, I mean, I think also, too, like, another thing that, like, cannabis has, like, failed spectacularly at is, like, a lot of the quote-unquote social equity programs because they have issued a lot of licenses. But, like, even in California, like, LA issued, I think 150, like 2 have opened so far because like it's basically impossible. It's like, hi, we're doing what we believe is to be, you know, beneficial, but like the reality of the real estate opening costs, like no one can actually do it. Like, I mean, like New Jersey, they did it with like the conditional licenses, but like, you know, almost none of those are like micro businesses, but like none are going to convert. And like also another challenge too is with like licensing, like the way that they tried to in the past promote equity was by like in-state caps. Like this must be a 51% state-owned business, but like now with like Veracyte's lawsuit against the Coward program in New York and like the stays on that, like if that gets upheld, like that could like combined with the main decision last year, like completely blow up residency requirements. So that's another like huge thing that also will be interesting to watch as it goes forward.
No, those are all really good things. Basically, what he's talking about is just different mechanisms under public policy, under the laws that we tried to put in place to sort of prevent the marijuana industry from getting to the point it's at today. And some worked and some didn't, and some don't stand up under the law. So, guys, we've run out of time. Thank you all for your attention. I appreciate this. I wish you all the best of luck. I'm easy to find, Bob Hoban, Hoban. If you Google me, you find me. Send me an email, reach out anytime. I'm always available. I got a great staff and love to talk about this stuff. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.